Welcome to the ACETA Archive of Excellence. Today we're talking to John Fowler. John started out in amateur theatre, gained his electrical qualifications and became pioneer lighting director at Channel 9 in Melbourne, where he lit such productions as In Melbourne Tonight, The Don Lane Show, and all of Nine's important outside broadcasts, including the opening of the Sydney Opera House and the Sydney Entertainment Centre. John, in between, found time to run the Sunbury Rock Festivals, which changed Australian live music forever. John also ran his own business, doing architectural and landscape lighting, before moving up to the Mallee, where he took charge of an important local art centre, mentoring young people coming through, and also becoming one of the foundation directors of the George Fairfax Memorial Festival, which still runs today. Welcome, John. John, can you tell me something about your early life and your education?
Well, my personal schooling education is not really fantastic. It was only through to state school and high school, and I got my merit certificate then before I left and went to work as an apprentice electrician.
And when did you gain that qualification?
I gained that qualification. That meant travelling, of course, to Melbourne 3 nights a week from Frankston, which is 25 miles away. Long trip and travelling for a young student, travelling at night on the rail.
And I understand you were involved in amateur theatre as well.
Yes, I was. I joined the local theatre group and learned about stage lighting. The Frankston Theatre Group at that stage was very well known through different theatre groups during that time. And was very professional in most of the things they did. And I got a good grounding in stage lighting.
And how did you become involved with television?
That was very... I decided to get out of normal household wiring and all that sort of thing, you know. I was employed as an apprentice electrician, finished my apprenticeship, gained the A grade certificate at that stage, but an ad cropped up for doing lighting work at Channel 9, and I applied for the job. I was one of many, and luckily through my background of having done stage lighting, I won the job. But the interesting thing about it was that I actually told Rod Biddle, who was then the chief engineer and was doing the interview for the job. I look back on it now, and I actually said to him that I'd consider taking the job in this television industry, and I eventually said I'd take the job. But that was a week or two later after the interview.
Okay. And at that stage, GTV only had Studio 1 and Studio 2. What sort of lighting equipment did you have?
Well, it was interesting in those days. They only had what they call scoops, which were 1,000-watt ordinary incandescent lighting. They had pups, which were 750-watt spots. They also had 2Ks and 5Ks spotlights, which gave them all the light they wanted. And of course, they were just applied for individual people and for big open sets. They took the bigger lamps because television in those days used a lot of light.
Yes, your cameras were fairly light hungry in those days.
They were.
What sort of rigging systems did you have? Did you have a good grid and good dimming systems?
Yes, they put just aluminium grid aluminium pipe grid, spaced at about 5 feet apart, with ducting, the electrical ducting with the power points with all the power points run along the duct.
And had you had any input to the design of that, or was that there when you arrived?
That was there when I arrived. We followed through in a bigger design with I think there are about 400 odd outlets in the studio itself.
And the dimmer system?
The dimmer system was a really unknown one, but very, very operative and cheap to install. They were what were they called?
Reactors?
Satchel reactors.
And in Melbourne Tonight became very popular very quickly. What was your involvement with the lighting for that?
My involvement in the show was in charge of the lighting. We had a crew on board who were very good at what they did.
IMT quickly outgrew Studio One. A new studio was built, Studio 9. What hand did you have in designing the equipment from that, and where did you get the information that you needed?
Most of the information for the electrical installation, I had the knowledge to do that and to install the correct amount of wiring and outlets. I think there was something like 500 outlets installed in the studio, and they were transposed into different dimmers as they were required in any order through a patch panel, which was quite unusual at that time. It hadn't been used in a great number of installations. We were able to patch any outlet to any dimmer, and it was quite amazing and quite versatile for lighting.
I understood you spent some time at the BBC in England. Was that before Studio 9 was built?
I can't quite remember the actual. That was in 1970, and I was over there for 3 months in their winter actually, and during their great rubbish strike, which was rather interesting. But the BBC was a great place to learn what went on in a much bigger operation.
Yeah. Now, the dimmer system in Studio 9 was resistance dimmers controlled by a Strand console. Was there a reason you chose resistance dimmers?
No, it was just because of the control panel itself. It was like a big Wurlitzer organ. In fact, the lighting console at that stage was based on the design of an organ. where you could reach all the switches in tabs. It was quite an interesting setup, and it worked extremely well for the high pressure shows that we did through Channel 9 at that stage.
At that stage, the variety shows were 4 nights a week for 1.5 hours every night, so there was a great deal of pressure. I understand that dimmer system had some limited memory.
It wasn't too bad, considering that Channel 9 had the biggest studio at the time, and it was a very versatile studio. We could run lighting from one end of the studio to the other, which was quite amazing with the number of lights that we used.
And you had a full cyclorama, step 2 blue floor, and each night you had a ballet to light and a chorus number to light, plus several artists. What was the process of deciding and cooperating with the set designers to get the achieved result?
It was very interesting. We had a production meeting 2:00 in the afternoon, where we discussed what we were going to do with the shows in both set-wise and movements, so we knew exactly what was happening. It was quite amazing to produce a show, a variety show, that ran for usually an hour and a half each night, with at least 5 or 6 production numbers and comedy and that sort of thing. That all had to be lit over quite an area in most places. Different sets of areas.
As well as the variety shows, of course, you did a number of specials out of Studio 9, including the BP Super Show specials. Can you tell us something of what you worked on there?
BP specials like Paul Hogan, quite amazing. We had production meetings beforehand, and we discussed what we were going to do, both with comedy sketches and musical items, things like that, or bands, even big band, noted bands would come in. They were shows that were done once a month. It was the usual standard of production, but it was a big production, and they were very popular with the general public.
As well as those shows, GTV was known for the number of large outside broadcasts they did, including circus performers and ballet. And I remember one at the Palais with Rudolph Nureyev and Dame Margot Fontaine and Robert Helpman in Don Quixote. Can you tell how you augmented the stage lighting to keep that production a true theatrical production, as well as have enough light for cameras?
Well, that was the whole point. We'd work in with the technical crew from whatever theatre, whatever place we were doing the show from, so that we didn't upset the balance of the show, and kept it remained as it was presented as a stage production.
Now, a lot of that equipment would have had to be hired in for the occasion, so did you liaise with the rental companies like Massons, Mole Richardson and Strand?
Yes, we did. We arranged for the equipment. We knew who had what equipment. we didn't have actually had to. It did. We did move a lot of lighting equipment in, but we didn't upset the stage production.
Yeah.
That was a whole secret, was to do a television show with enough light that would feed the television production, but it didn't up the stage show.
GTV9 was a very busy place with many productions going on. Can you describe a typical working day?
Yes, I think I should be able to remember it. It started early morning, early morning breakfast, morning programs, interviews and things like that. That'd be in one studio. Then you would have the situation where there'd be the Tarek's Happy Show in the afternoon. That'd be addressed to kids of all ages. Amazing to see a studio suddenly do early morning breakfast, then change to another studio and live programming at a separate time, like I think around about 5 o'clock, would be a kids program. Happy Hammond was one I can remember. The others, Jeff Cork and other people like that. Quite amazing to see it change. And along come Graham Kennedy, who would do the evening program at 9 o'clock. Rehearsals would take place in one studio. At 2 o'clock there'd be productions happening at that time of the day, and all sorts of things would be happening. But all, more, as I say, morning program, children's program, and then the nighttime stuff. And they would be 5 nights a week, or 5 days a week, or 5 mornings a week. Amazing.
I can remember situations with cartoon hostings in Studio 2, new faces in Studio 1, and in the tea break a separate crew would do the news, and meanwhile there's a BP Super Show being recorded in Studio 9. So that would have made a drain not only on staff but also equipment.
Exactly. It was amazing the amount of equipment that was used, all the lighting gear, the sound gear, camera gear. Amazing. The whole studio network was operating every day. It was a very busy place.
And what would have been the biggest size of your lighting department at its biggest? Roughly how many people?
In operation, well, there'd be at least 3 to 4 cameras. There would be sound people. There'd be probably two or three to five sound people. There'd be half a dozen lighting people. Probably 20 or 25 people involved just in the studios alone.
I was thinking more of the lighting department and the fact that you would have to juggle rosters to make sure that every shift was covered.
Yes, it was. Lighting people, it could be anything from probably 5 people, 6 people a day. Just that's mainly for the big variety shows. The smaller studio probably have 2 or 3, just depending on what was being done, whether it was just a little commercial, or something like that.
And you had some efficiencies in place in Studio 9. You had a row of set spots down the centre of the studio so that you could actually, I remember 29 key light very well, which were left there and kept as permanent, but everything else around it could change.
Oh yes, we'd move lights around. There were centre spots in the studio where people could walk from the rear of the studio right through where the audience were. That was in different things, but they were able to move. They were always set up at the same levels, so there was no variance, there was no change in lighting. It was all very carefully set up.
Of course, one of the big challenges was the change to colour television, which happened officially in March 1975, but you started preparing for that in the early 1970s.
Yes, I approached the company for permit to, or allowance to go to the BBC. I had an invite to go to the BBC, and I spent 3 months there in, unfortunately, the winter, but I learned so much, just the way they handled lighting and the colour. We were able to reintroduce, in my mind, colour, which I hadn't been able to use in the black and white days. There was no need to use colour, which we didn't bother with. It was all done by painting and decoration and things like that.
Mm. And now, famously, of course, John, you are remembered for the Sunbury Rock Festivals, which was something a little bit different in your life. Can you tell me a little bit about those?
Yes, that was a huge production, and it really did change the type of music that was played by Australian bands. Australian bands were being outproduced by overseas bands, and I wanted to change that. And through the pop festival, the Sunbury Pop Festival, we certainly did change it. It became 3 days of nothing but Australian music. But then after a while, I think 5 years it was, over the 5 years, we suddenly brought in theatre productions in a tent. The kids that went to the pop festival loved that because they found that if there was a certain band on that they didn't really care about or want to listen to, they could go off to this other tent which was had theatre productions.
And ballet, I understand,
and ballet
yeah.
and all sorts of things. We just changed the whole concept.
So you were steering the festivals off in the directions of overseas festivals like Reading.
Yes, Reading was based on that. In fact, Queen came out to Australia in 73, I think it was.
74.
Yeah, you've got a better memory than me. Queen came out, and we were told at the time that Queen were going to be the biggest band in the world. And believe me, they were.
So there was a sad demise of the Sunbury Festivals in 1975 when it rained.
Unfortunately, that was so sad. It was the first and only time that it did rain. and we had one Melbourne radio station, which shall be nameless at this stage, while broadcasting that it was raining out there at the festival and it was a mud bath, when in fact there wasn't much rain out there, a few spots I suppose, but that's the way it happened.
Now, during this time, of course, you were juggling the Sunbury festivals with continuing production work at Nine. And you also worked on a number of outside broadcasts, like the opening of the Sydney Opera House, which I understand was the first time the sails had ever been lit externally.
Yes, it was. It was quite successful. It was quite an amazing sight on Sydney Harbour. I was quite pleased, proud of that one.
And of course that was the Royal Command performance as well.
That's right. We even had the Queen walking up under the lighting right through up to where her seat was.
Now, John, we come to the early 1980s and Sydney builds a new venue called the Sydney Entertainment Centre. And you're called upon to do the lighting direction for that. Can you tell us something about the opening of the Sydney Entertainment Centre?
Yes, that was an amazing event. It was a very big building, a big one to hold big groups and big acts and that sort of thing. And it was a big area, which was most important. And the amount of lighting that we used there was quite astronomical.
I understand it was your first 1,000,000-watt rig.
Yes, but basically it was. And the new switchboard that had been put in there for the event failed. And I remember I think it was the day before, we had the New South Wales government minister come in, and they wanted to know whether they had a show or they didn't have a show because they didn't have a switchboard that was working properly. And we had to guarantee that we'd have the switchboard repaired or replaced, a brand new switchboard of a huge size replaced in the building to get the show working. And we got it done through Strand Electric at the time.
And of course you had a slew of Australian and overseas stars for that, so it was quite a complicated show.
Yes, it was.
Do you have any specific memories of that show?
One, we had the army, we didn't, the Channel 9 did. They had the Australian Army involved in doing a wartime capture, I suppose, of what it was like, and they had people dropping in from the balconies and everywhere, doing the action for the event, and it was quite a big event, believe me, and involved a very involved lighting setup, quite amazing. I think it was about one of the biggest lighting jobs we did.
And then in 1985 you left Channel 9 and you branched out and started your own lighting company doing outdoor work.
Yes, we realised that there was a need to show people how to light their gardens and buildings and stuff like that. So we designed the company to be able to do demonstrations at night to light people's gardens and what amount of lighting that they were able to have without spending a huge amount of money. And that's consequently one of the reasons Melbourne is well lit around the suburbs and areas where gardens come to light at night.
And of course now, these days, it's expected that the outsides of buildings will be lit for special occasions. I understand you also put the first P lighting in trees in the streets of Melbourne.
Yes, we did demonstration in Melbourne of how trees could look when they're lit, and consequently some of the trees in Collins Street and other streets were lit at night, and they quite amazing.
So you would have actually been working at that point at the cutting edge of the lighting technology that was available.
Yes, unfortunately, equipment for buildings wasn't or didn't come forth until future years, done by other companies, and that's consequently why you see now a lot of buildings around Melbourne and in various places, buildings are lit quite pretty.
Mm. And of course, colour changing technology means you can set the scene for whatever you want.
Yes.
Now, John, you came up here to the Murray area and took over the operation of the Robinvale Arts Centre. Can you tell us a little bit about your time there?
Yes, yes, I can. There was quite a need for artistic works. Robinvale had its own theatre, which was unusual for a little country town like Robinvale. But we introduced different stage productions to the area, musical, small musicals and that sort of thing. And the public suddenly, or not suddenly, but became used to getting reasonable acts in Robinvale, and eventually we spread to when council amalgamation came about. We moved to Swan Hill and looked after the Swan Hill area.
And I understand you introduced a ticketing system for them.
Oh yes, I did. They didn't have a ticketing system of any type, and we introduced an automatic ticketing system. We got government funding for the town hall, and got a computerised ticketing system.
And I understand that you were instrumental in helping establish the Fairfax Festival.
The Fairfax Festival, yes. We saw the opportunity of putting on a musical concert by the Murray, and at the Robinvale boat ramp was a beautiful spot to have a stage and an orchestra at night.
Now, John, in a life filled with the theatrical arts, you finished out your career with an art glass studio and an observatory here in Lake Boga. Can you tell us something about the art objects you were making?
Well, I can't. There's not much to say except that they were specialised bowls and dishes and plates and things like that. And they became very popular, and I used to produce those uh, at the factory where we had the kilns to be able to do this. That was just another subject that I loved, and was able to create stuff. That was the big thing, was being able to create things.
Now, in your working life at Channel 9, I know you mentored many people, and you had the opportunity to do the same thing with the art scene here up on the Murray. So were you able to bring some young people through to an understanding of the theatrical arts?
Yes, we were. We had the Fairfax Festival. I think that's the issue. That's the one that you're thinking about.
John, can you tell me why the Fairfax Festival started?
Yes, I can. George Fairfax was very involved in theatre in Melbourne and had been for years. I knew George. I got to know him over the years, and this concert that I wanted to do on the Murray, I called it the Music on the Murray. And the reason I chose George was because of his knowledge of theatre, big productions and stuff like that. And I approached George and got him, employed him as the feature producer of the Music on the Murray. Unfortunately, George died, got sick and died. That left us in one heck of a hole, but he'd already half produced the concert anyway. So I got the idea of doing something in memory of George and what had happened. So I approached Vicky Fairfax, his wife, and I approached Vicky about doing some sort of a memorial for him. And I created the George Fairfax Memorial Festival.
And where did you stage that?
We staged that we did the concert, kept the concert going, and did the concert at the boat ramp in Robinvale. That was a really beautiful night, except that it did rain, or did start to rain. Anyway, to cut a long story short, this festival was created, and the idea was to create a theatre production from each high school, which we got somebody up to produce a theatre production at each school in the Maui area. This festival has now been going for over 20 years. Vicky is patron of the festival, and the festival is still going 20 years later, as I said, with many schools in the Valley area having a theatre production at each festival.
So that's not only a tribute to George Fairfax, but a tribute to your vision as well.
Well, yes, I'd like to think so.
Yeah.
It's done a lot of good and created a lot of interest at each school that's taken part. And they're not all big schools. There's some very small schools, but the, the excitement when they're in production is quite amazing. What's going to happen through this pandemic is that unfortunately it was cancelled last year. I think they're doing some sort of a theatre production anyway, which will carry it on for the future.
Well, John, you certainly left your mark on the industry. Now, what happens in the studio stays in the studio, but there might be some stories you can tell that throw a little light on some of the personalities involved.
But yes, well, I suppose one of the ones I'll never forget is Mr. Graham Kennedy, who everyone will remember Graham. We're in the process of planting a flash pot in a cannon that was to be supposedly exploded.
I understand it was a brand new cannon which had just been made by the props department.
Yes, it was. A big model cannon. It looked like a real cannon. And Graham Kennedy happened to walk past the chap that was loading the flash pot and said, "Oh, make it bigger, make it bigger." They didn't tell me that it had been made bigger, but when I pressed the button that set the flash pot off, the cannon blew apart, it flew into pieces, the control room window rattled, and I thought I'd killed Kennedy. But anyway, as it happened, fortunately, Kennedy walked away. The cannon was blown to pieces, and I'll never forget that particular event.
And of course, there are a lot of flash pots used in comedy sketches, etc., on IMT.
Oh yes, I'll make the point. There was a serious accident at one stage through Channel 7. One had happened and somebody got burnt bodily. I don't know where it was, but there was an investigation into how the flash pots were fired and controlled. And they interviewed me and one or two other people at Channel 9, funnily enough, for the safety, what we did for safety, that we had never had a faulty flash at any stage of Channel 9's productions. They interviewed us because of the safety precautions we'd taken.
Now, we haven't spoken much about safety, but the theatrical industry with flies and working at heights, etc., is inherently dangerous. And yet there wasn't much in the way of safety in those early years. Can you tell me how you addressed safety while working?
Yes, safety was very important. There were safety pins put on every spotlight, every lamp fitting that was hung from the grid above the general public or actors or anybody like that. And believe me, there was an eye kept on every lamp fitting that was hung, every spotlight. They all had their safety things put in, and lighting staff, particularly in those sort of things, and any firing position, there was a lot of care taken, and everybody was warned around the position of any article that might cause harm.
And of course you were dealing with large amounts of electricity.
Yes, we were.
There were safety trip outs on the dimmers in Studio 9 so that you couldn't reach into the dimmer racks without tripping a safety cord.
That's right. Yep. Yes, safety was of prime importance at all times.
Is there anything else you'd like to add, John, about your time in the television and live production industry?
I think we've just about covered everything. I think it's probably just given an insight and generally what happened through life. It was always a busy life. You were always flat out doing something to get stuff recorded or live to air. It was quite a good life.
John Fowler, thank you very much.
Pleasure.